Washington in 2020 often beggars a belief in a fake American president answering a deadly pandemic with ignorance and blaming racial unrest with racism, stoking violent conversations while his fearful party stands mute. Merely observing those realities provokes familiar complaints. The fake President Donald Trump and his allies insist that the mainstream journalists are offering the fake news reflecting bias against the older, rural, conservative, Christian, white, working class adherents of the modern GOP. Well, technically, nobody in the Republican Party ever works anyway. But what if the accounting comes from one of the Republican Party's most accomplished political strategists, and in fact it has? Consider that this was all a lie from one of the most accomplished GOP strategists, disillusioned Republican ad maker Stuart Stevens, an insider provoked by Trump to reconsider his life's work. He casts Trump as not an aberration, but rather the culmination of decades-long evolution within the GOP. Having advised 4 Republican presidential nominees and dozens of winning Senate and gubernatorial campaigns, Stevens blends diagnosis of the party's ills with confessions for having fostered them. He says, blame me when you look around and see a dysfunctional political system and a Republican Party that has gone insane. Stephen writes, many will argue that my view of the Republican Party is distorted by my loathing of Trump. The truth is that Trump brought it all into clarity and made the pretending impossible. Trump's crudeness, he argues, has stripped the veneer from the familiar Republican themes concerning social order, values, and even economic policy. But if they once represented principled ideological arguments, they've now curdled into content-free bludgeons to preserve power for the dwindling ranks of white conservatives in a rapidly diversifying America. A gifted stylist who has written television scripts as well as 7 other books, Stevens dissects several categories of deception, though he could not have anticipated this. The book completed last September does not include the words coronavirus or George Floyd, or even events of recent days that keep offering improbably vivid evidence for his assessments. His largest target is the politics of race, the Mississippi native borrowing from historical allusions to the nation's founding. He calls it the original Republican sin. It traces to the mid-1960s when the GOP presidential candidate Barry Goldwater had opposed civil rights legislation signed into law by Democratic incumbent Lyndon Johnson. Trump has discarded the subtlety of what became known as the Southern strategy to seek white votes. Almost exclusively last week, he threatened to veto legislation that would remove the names of Confederate generals from the military bases, even if commanders want to rename them. The same has happened with family values, which Stephen calls never a set of morals or values that the Republican Party really desired to live by, but instead another weapon to help portray those on the other side as being out of the mythical America mainstream. While he enjoys near unanimous support among white evangelical Christians, Trump this past week offered well wishes to a fake friend charged by federal prosecutors with child sex trafficking. Stevens skewers the GOP's spiritual devotion to cutting taxes Trump sought unsuccessfully to force a payroll tax cut into the coronavirus relief legislation, only to be knocked back by Republican members of the Senate. And Stevens laments his party's rejection of science and evidence for conspiracy theories and dogma to shield special interest allies like the National Redneck Association Alliance. Today, the intellectual leaders of the Republican Party are the paranoids, kooks, know-nothings, and bigots who once could be heard only on the late-night talk shows. Stevens writes, Trump last week called coronavirus testing overrated. He falsely suggested that school children don't transmit the virus, and he boasted of his performance on a cognitive test that screens for early signs of dementia. Conservative media outlets like the ones that Stevens labels a machinery of deception encourages the Republican flight from reality and risk backlash if they don't. When faux news surveys showed him trailing Democratic opponent Joe Biden last week, Trump denounced it as a fake poll, which it wasn't. Taken together, Stevens concludes that these trends have made the GOP a white grievance party. The grievances grow as a demographic, cultural, and economic changes move America closer to becoming a majority-minority nation and alter the balance of societal power. White fear has become the unalloyed rallying cry of Trump's bid for a second term. Last week, he rolled back fair housing regulations that he claims would destroy suburban neighborhoods. He falsely accused Biden of seeking to defund the police, which is not what he had said at all. I mean, that's not what Biden had said anyway. Warned mail-in voting would rig the election, which it won't, and sent federal officers to battle Portland Street protesters in the name of law and order, something that Trump doesn't understand what law and order is anyway. But Tom Ridge, the former Pennsylvania Republican governor who became the first Secretary of Homeland Security following the 9/11 attacks, warned against the specter of the fake president's personal militia. Republicans in office now say very little. The polls show voters speaking empathetically, rejecting Trump's bluster on the pandemic and racial division alike, and they've made Democrats midsummer favorables, the favorites to win the White House and undivided control of Congress in November. Would repudiation make Republicans change in pursuit of a broader swath of the 21st century America? It didn't matter after 2012 when Stevens' client Mitt Romney lost to the then President Barack Obama. He says, I'm not hopeful, the author concludes. He says, I'm better than most. I know the seductive lure of believing what you prefer to believe and ignoring the obvious truth. So, if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Ryan Van Wyk, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.